Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to get started here momentarily. We're just confirming that the audio is working. 1 second. So today's topic is going to be going over promissory note investing, which is a very popular topic. And so hopefully you find this helpful. I've confirmed that the audio works, so let's get started. Please ask questions in the chat box. If you're watching here live, if you're watching as a recording, you can ask questions in the comments and we will get back to you within 24 business hours. So let's take a look about, and also please like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. So as you can see from the PowerPoint here, we're going to be discussing investing, self-directed solo 401k funds, and promissory notes. We're going to go over the process, the considerations, a lot of good frequently asked questions. So just to get started here, so we've got some key rules, and just to kind of set this understanding, I mean, we're talking about a solo 401k for a self-employed person. This has to be a self-directed solo 401k, like with our clients and the plans that we provide, because it has to be a plan that allows for alternative investing. And then a promissory note, that would be when you lend in simple terms, when you lend your 401k funds to someone else. So that has to be documented. Usually with a promissory note, it could be secured or unsecured. Secured, we'll talk about the details. In other words, where the borrower is promising to pay back your solo 401k. So key rules to understand before investing is, number one, it cannot be a disqualified party. So a disqualified party is going to be someone like yourself or a business that you own, or your spouse or your kids or parents, people up and down the family tree. Of course, the loan has to have an interest rate. So the purpose of your solo 401k is to grow your retirement account. You could not give an interest-free loan, using your 401k dollars to someone else. So of course, the interest rate has to be, it cannot be usury. So some states will limit the interest rate that can be charged. So you would also want to consider the borrower's credit history. So it's got to be a market rate. In other words, what are the terms that this borrower could obtain if the borrower went to a bank, for example? The final column here in terms of these key rules is secured versus unsecured. So secured means that there is a security interest, there's collateral that would apply, that the 401k would have the ability to foreclose upon in the event that the borrower defaults on the loan. So unsecured means that there's no collateral. So generally that means that the borrower has to pay a higher interest rate because the risk is higher for the lender, in this case your 401k. Because if the borrower doesn't pay back, there's no other collateral to go after. And so secured notes, again, are generally secured by real estate, but it could be other things like equipment or even stock. And we'll get into some more details in the following pages in terms of how a promissory note is secured. So let's first go over the steps for investing a solo 401k plan in promissory notes. So of course you need to open a solo 401k plan. It needs to be, like we talked about earlier, a provider like us that allows for alternative investments such as promissory notes. Step number 2, determine if it's secured or unsecured. So if unsecured, the solo 401k's only option in trying to enforce payments is to take legal action against the borrower. Step 3, compose the promissory note. So here, this is where you're going to have the investment terms, such as who the borrower is, the lender, which is the plan, how much, the interest rate, the maturity date. It could even address guidelines as far as what happens if the borrower defaults. In terms of how to list the solo 401k, you would generally use the convention, such as the one listed here, Jane Doe, trustee of ABC Solo 401k Trust. And so here the borrower is promising to pay back the plan. So, and I see we've got some comments. Thank you so much. Obviously, we appreciate your business. Thank you. And please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we will answer those questions as we go through the slides. Continuing on, in addition to the note, you need an amortization schedule. So this is where it specifies the payments, when they're due, how much is applied to the principal, how much is applied as interest. Those payments are going to flow back to the solo 401k bank account or brokerage account. So if you lend money to your neighbor from your 401k, your neighbor is not going to write a check payable to you personally. Your neighbor is going to write a check payable to your solo 401k. And then if you have a bank account, for example, that payment is deposited into your solo 401k bank account. And then finally, you fund the investment. So that's where the funds will flow from the solo 401k bank account. So for example, with the neighbor situation, if I have a bank account, I can write a check to that individual to fund the loan. And then as we mentioned, going forward, the payments come back into that solo 401k bank account. It could be the neighbor can pay back the money by check or electronically. Either is acceptable. And I see we've got some good questions here. We're going to actually address some of these in the FAQs. So, but we'll we'll just kind of knock them out here. And then if you don't have any questions as we go through the FAQs, then we can certainly come back. So the first one is investing a promissory note subject to UBIT or unrelated business income tax? So the answer is no, as long as it's a true loan. So if it's just a loan, which is what a promissory note is, then it's not subject to unrelated business income tax. Where it could come up is if it's a little bit more complicated loan, like it's a convertible note. So let's say you're lending money to a business, and then there's provisions which allows that note, that loan, to be converted to equity. So now if all of a sudden you have equity in this business, then yes, you could have a UBIT issue. Can a promissory note be a simple interest note? Yes, it certainly can. So let's go over some terminology. So a mortgage and a deed of trust are really, for our purposes, synonyms, in the sense that these are legal documents that allow the note to be secured. So this is how a security interest, so a lien, for example, is able to be placed on property. Some states use the deed of trust, some use the mortgage. There can be differences between the two. It depends on the state that you're in. For example, with a deed of trust, you generally don't have to go to a court to enforce it. But some states don't offer that, so they require judicial foreclosure, which means that you have to go to a court if you want to foreclose on a property, which is going to take, in all likelihood, more time. It'd be more expensive to do so. A note is defined here as an unrecorded legal document that obligates the borrower to repay a debt at a stated interest during a specified period of time. So that's what we were talking about before in terms of documenting the loan on a promissory note. And a secured note is really just a note or loan that's backed by collateral, like real estate, or it could be other things like we mentioned, like equipment. So then we've got a couple more terminology or terms here that we've defined. Another is collateral. So collateral, that would be the property that is the security. That is what's securing that obligation of the borrower to pay back the loan. So if the borrower defaults, in other words, the borrower doesn't pay back the loan, now that property is at risk. The collateral is at risk. Balloon payment. This is what's referred to when you have a situation and that there's a final payment which is larger than the payments that preceded it. So you might have, relatively smaller equal payments for the life of the loan up until you get to the final payment, where there's a balloon large payment that would then become due. That's referred to as a balloon payment. So this is allowable. You can negotiate that type of term or these terms when you are negotiating a promissory note with a borrower. So now we're going to flip into some FAQs. So the first one we got here is, can my solo 401k write a note to my LLC? So in other words, let's say you are a consultant and you have an LLC for your business, and you don't have any employees, so you set up a solo 401k. So now you're learning that you can invest in a promissory note, you can lend money to other people, but you cannot lend money to a disqualified person. So an LLC that you own is a disqualified person. So no, you would not be able to invest in a promissory note to your LLC. That would be a prohibited transaction. However, you could consider doing a 401k participant loan. So that's where you would borrow money from your 401k, a loan from the 401k to you. You can borrow up to 50% of the balance, not to exceed $50,000. And we'll prepare the loan documents as part of our services. And then you're free to use that money however you want. So if you want to turn around and then write a second loan from yourself to your LLC, you would be free to do that. The next FAQ here, is it okay to write an interest only plus balloon loan to myself to be used for down payment on investment real estate, as I can get better financing personally than my solo 401k? So again, no, you cannot do that. It's similar to the first FAQ, but again, the alternative here is that you could take a 401k participant loan, assuming you haven't already done so. And again, we would prepare those loan documents as part of our services for no additional charge. So the next question here is, so if I create a solo 401k and invest in a promissory note that pays interest, so that a 1099 INT is issued, does the 401k have to pay tax on that interest? So the example is a $100,000 note that pays 10% interest of $10,000. Let's say the tax liability is $4,000. Does the 401k plan need to pay $4,000 in taxes? No, because the 401k is a tax deferred vehicle. So no payments are going to grow on a tax deferred basis. So you don't pay taxes on the money that's in the 401k until you withdraw it, for example, when you're of retirement age. Also note, like we talked about with the good question, unrelated business income tax is not going to apply because this is a true loan. So UBIT does not apply as well. All right, next set of questions. If I lend funds from my account as a hard money loan and I also charge points, are the points also considered a gain for purposes of the solo 401k? Yes, and this would grow on a tax deferred basis in the solo 401k. So whether it's labeled points or interest, it's growing inside the solo 401k on a tax deferred basis. Don't hesitate to ask questions. So the next FAQ we'll go through is, can my solo 401k buy an existing promissory note? So here we're talking about a situation where there's already a loan. Let's say that someone else has lent money to another third party. So you've got two unrelated people that have lent money one to the other. And so then let's say the original lender doesn't want to wait around to collect that money and wants to sell that note. Your solo 401k can buy that note from that unrelated person, and now that borrower is now going to have to pay your 401k as opposed to paying the original lender. So the original lender will need to assign the note to you. Depending on whether it's secured, you may also need to record this with the county. Obviously, you're going to need to communicate with the borrower so they know to send the payments to your 401k going forward. So we've got a good question here. Can our solo 401k provide a loan to a spouse's flip business, or is it disqualified because it's a spouse? Good question. So no, you cannot, because a business owned by your spouse is considered to be a disqualified person. And we've got another question too. We'll address this FAQ on this slide, and then we'll come back to that good question. So this question on the slide here is saying, I've invested my solo 401k in a promissory note secured by real estate, so a mortgage, and the borrower is deducting the interest paid to the solo 401k, which is the lender, from their personal tax return. Does my solo 401k need to issue a Form 1098 mortgage interest statement reflecting the interest paid. So from a 401k reporting perspective, a 1098 is not required, because that is only required if it's part of a trade or business, which does not apply to a retirement trust, because here you're investing as a passive investor. You're investing your solo 401k as a passive investor, not as a business. However, you're not prohibited from issuing a 1098 to the borrower if they are requesting the documentation. So let's tackle some of these good comments here. So right now I have an individual 401k with T Rowe, a solo 401k. What steps do I need for a portion in real estate and remaining in target retirement funds promissory notes? Got it. So thank you so much for that great question. So you can restate your solo 401k with T Rowe through our plan, which would allow for real estate investing, which would allow for investing in promissory notes or the other alternative investments that you're thinking of. And so essentially you would just need to submit our application. We would restate the plan under our IRS approved documents, help you get the money into a new account where you're going to have checkbook control and be able to make these types of investments. So then we've got another good question here. Can I combine 401k funds with personal and or family member funds to fund the note? So that's a good question. So technically you can do that. So you could either do it as two separate notes, one from your with your personal money, one with your 401k money, or it's going to have to be documented on one note where you show the percentages that are essentially borrowed or loaned by each party. You want to be careful though that if you don't want to be in a position where you have a senior position as with respect to your 401k, so that arguably you're not personally benefiting from using your 401k money along with your personal money. Hopefully that answered your question about combining your 401k funds and personal funds. I mean, the short answer is yes, you can do it. There's some special considerations though. You want to make sure you document it with the percentages, or you do two separate notes. Make sure you're not in a more senior position and better off than the 401k if the loan defaults. We got another follow-up question on the T Rowe scenario. So you will not continue with T Rowe. You would restate the plan with T Rowe, meaning change the documents, and you're going to have to move the money out of the T Rowe account. Why? Because on T Rowe's books, that's a 401k provided by T Rowe, which of course doesn't allow for any of these good investments. So we would help you get a new account set up in the name of the restated plan, under the EIN number of the restated plan, where you're going to have checkbook control. That could be a bank account, that could be a brokerage account. So it's similar. For example, Fidelity, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, these are all very popular options. And of course, we'll handle the transfer, we'll handle the account setup, we'll handle it all to get you to the point where you're able to start making investments. Hopefully that helps answer your question. So a couple more FAQs on this page. Can my solo 401k invest in a promissory note secured by foreign real estate? Yes, provided the borrower is an unrelated person. Please note that it would be best to work with a local legal advisor to determine the cost and process to foreclose on the property. So it could be difficult to foreclose on property in a foreign country, in simple terms. So you're going to want to pre-consider that before you proceed. Can my solo 401k invest in a promissory note that holds junior or second lien? Yes, provided the borrower is an unrelated person. Okay, we go back to the good comments here. So if I'm self-employed, and I'm glad we were able to answer the T Rowe question. Thank you so much for your good questions. So we've got another question here. I'm self-employed. If for some reason I have to dissolve the company and take a job where I'm an employee. Do I have to shut down the solo 401k? And what if I have notes that are still open? So yes, if you're no longer self-employed, shut down the plan, transfer the assets to an IRA. If you have alternative assets, you can't transfer it to just any IRA. So we'd have to go to a self-directed IRA like our IRA LLC, which would allow you to continue to hold those promissory notes until they're paid off. That's going to have to be, and there's a process. We would do the final 5500 EZ to wind down the plan. The rollover is going to have to be reported on a 1099-R, and we will handle all of that as part of our services. So a couple more FAQs here. Are promissory note investments subject to unrelated business income tax? No, as we talked about before, but please note the convertible note scenario where you might have, all of a sudden you have equity. Now you may be subject to UBIT. The income attributable to that equity investment could potentially subject the 401k to unrelated business income tax. Can I roll over a promissory note from a self-directed IRA to my solo 401k? Yes, provided the IRA is not a Roth IRA, because of course the Roth IRA rules don't allow for the rollover of any funds or assets from a Roth IRA to any 401k. So in that case, the borrower is going to need to be informed that the note has been assigned, right? So that the payments are made to the 401k going forward. The IRA custodian will need to report the rollover on a 1099-R. So that we concluded all the FAQs there. I appreciate everyone's participation and all the good questions. Please don't hesitate to ask any more. We do have more time. I'll just remind people to please like this video. We'd really appreciate that. Please subscribe. Please don't hesitate to ask questions in the comments. If you're watching on a video, you can contact us at business@mysolo401k.net or 1-800-489-7571. So I'm not seeing any more questions here. Well, thank you so much again. Everyone have a great day, and thank you again for your participation. We do appreciate it.